This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk with a self-described dreamer and nomad who writes about her journeys around the world connecting with other people. Her story may inspire you and cause you to consider a new path for yourself as you travel. Celine DaCosta is joining us via Skype from New York City. Celine, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited to talk to you about your journeys and your stories and everything that you've been doing. And I really think that it could inspire a lot of people. But let's start off with the three questions that we ask all of our guests so that our listeners can get a little bit of an insight into you. First of all, what has been your biggest discovery while traveling?
Well, there are many to pick from, but if I had to pick one, I would say just the fact that we are all so fundamentally the same that it's almost laughable. For example, one of the things that I specifically discovered on this journey around the world is I stayed with people all over, and I stayed with people who were on wealthier ends of the spectrum, and I stayed with people in villages who didn't have much, and of course, as humans, we all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted and be part of a community and yada yada, all the things you hear. But the funniest thing I found is that somehow we all can't pay our bills. So I thought that was pretty funny.
We all have bills.
And that made me realize that, wow, we are all the same. Really, we are equal.
Absolutely. The bills come no matter where you are. What's the favorite place you've been to, Celine?
That is a difficult question because it is like asking me if I like sweet or savory foods. Every place that I've been to has served me in very different ways. If I had to narrow it down, I can narrow it down to, I guess, 3, even though I really want to just spew out 10, but I'll narrow it down to 3 for very different reasons. I would say Italy, Colombia, and Nepal for now.
Wow. Fantastic. And the next place that you're traveling to?
I am going next week to Playa del Carmen in Mexico, and then I head off to Colombia.
So we caught you just in time.
Yes.
So let's talk about your journey. You stayed with 70 strangers in 17 countries across 4 continents. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it took you about 9 months, and you did it all for $8,500. Listeners, I'm not really good at math, so I had to break out my calculator, but that's $31.48 a day. Tell us about the journey.
Oh, well, part of the reason why I was able to do that is because I decided when I quit my job in advertising back in New York City about a year ago, I decided to not just travel the world, but I wanted to do it with an intent and a purpose. And I really wanted to challenge myself as well because I wanted something to look forward to at the end of the line. So I decided to design this project where I combined the things that I was best at, which is travel, connecting and speaking to people and writing. And I decided that I wanted to attempt to circumnavigate the globe by staying with people, like doing couch surfing, but never using any sort of like website assistance. So it would have to be done purely through human connection. And everyone that I would stay with would have to be connected to me personally somehow. So there would need to be somewhere along the line, I must have had met somebody in person. So I decided to do that. And part of the reason why I was able to do this on such a good budget is because I ended up, I think over the course of 9 months, I had a couple of emergency situations, ended up paying about $300 in accommodation over that time. But most of the time I did not pay for accommodation. And, just finding ways to hack travel and travel on the cheap while also not living that sort of lifestyle.
You put everything in storage when you quit your job, and this was the corporate advertising job. And you said you did this because you wanted to design my dream life from scratch. Did you succeed?
I'm almost there. Yeah, I would say that I'm well on my way. When I quit, I gave myself 1 year to live I decided, a lot of people when they say, oh, I dream of having like XYZ life, but I don't have money, but I have, rent to pay, and the list goes on. So I thought to myself, why not say to myself, I want to live this life and I'm going to live it. And then I'm going to deal with the challenges, the buts as they come. And of course, that requires a little bit of preparation. I didn't just, say like, screw you guys and, buy a one-way ticket. I planned for 6 months. I saved enough money to keep me afloat for enough to keep me surviving for 6 months. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do exactly what I want to do. And then I'm going to figure it out along the way. Worst case scenario, I come home, I'm sad, I'm defeated, I'm broke, and I just go back to another job, likely with better salary. So I really had nothing to lose.
Were you afraid or scared at all?
Totally. I'm always scared. And it's funny because a lot of people look at the things I've done, and I've had the word fearless pop up a lot, but I am not fearless at all. I have fears like anybody else. But I realized, and this is another lesson I've learned while traveling, that it's not a matter of whether or not you have fears. It's a matter of how you deal with them, how you approach them. And for me, I treat fears as my friends. I treat them as kindly, every time I have a fear, it's not like, oh my God, I can't do this because I'm scared. It's more like, okay, work with me here. How can we do this? It's like you can't push somebody off a cliff. You can gently talk them into jumping.
Listeners, Celine has a website, the nomadsoasis.com, the Nomads Oasis.com. And you have a video on there, Celine, and I want to play a little clip of it for our listeners, and then we'll talk about it here afterward.
I quit. I am leaving behind all my things and going off into the world with nothing but a carry-on and my integrity. And I'm going to do exactly what I want to do, which is to circumnavigate the globe via couch surfing, and I'm going to do it through my social network. I asked myself, is it possible for us to do what we are genuinely passionate about in a way that gives us purpose? Yes, it is. And if the way isn't obvious, then we have to make one. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.
I love that you say nothing but a carry-on and my integrity. Did that serve you well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Integrity intact, and my carry-on not so much. It's missing a wheel, but I made it.
Well, if you had to have one of the two intact, I'm glad it was your integrity.
Yeah.
Now, you also say that you are blissfully head over heels, crazy in love with the world. That's quite the love affair then. Oh, yeah.
I am very passionate about the world, and that is the broadest statement I've ever made.
And so has your love only increased as you've traveled? I mean, you have to have come across something that you just didn't like, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, another thing that I've learned is that every passion you have is associated with a boatload of crap. And people ask me like, well, oh, how do you travel like this? And, it's not glamorous. It's not as shiny as it looks maybe from social media. But I realized that it's a matter of choosing what crap you're willing to deal with, honestly. And for me, the negatives of travel, of course, I've seen things that broke my heart. I've seen things that have really hurt me in terms of course, like poverty in third world countries, or people treating each other poorly, or maybe in countries where human rights isn't as strong. For sure, I've seen it. But the good that I've seen and experienced is just so much stronger that for me, when I see the bad, I can look at it and be like, okay, this happens, this is life, but the good makes it more than worth it. And I think that applies both for the humanitarian things I've seen, as well as, me banging my head against the wall, trying to use the Wi-Fi internet somewhere and trying to upload my pictures and having it not work. But the stress and the negatives, when you look at the value and the growth and the transformation that the good brings you, it's just not even a question that it's worth it.
A boatload of crap. We'll debate whether to call this particular podcast episode that. Maybe we'll pass on that, but thank you. You mentioned that you've traveled the world full time and that you share your lessons of the world through your storytelling. How did that begin? Have you always been a writer, and how do you convey those lessons in that format?
Well, it's funny you asked me that because I actually didn't realize I had always been a writer since recently when I was going through my storage unit and stumbled upon all these journals that I was writing. Like even last week, I stumbled upon a journal that I had when I was 12. And I'm looking at the entries and it's like, life. What does life mean? Like, what does love mean? Like, what is the meaning of happiness? And I'm just like, whoa. This is what? I didn't even realize I was thinking about these things when I was 12. So the answer is yes. I've always been a writer since I was a little girl. I just don't think it's something I've ever noticed until recently. But thank God I have my journals to have reminded me of that. And then the second question, I forgot it already.
Sure. Give us some examples of your storytelling. What kind of stories have you written so far?
Well, let's see. Well, what comes to mind, just because I was recently writing this for a chapter for the book I'm writing, is I went to just an example, I went to a dynamic meditation retreat in Nepal. And I really stumbled upon this thing. Like I was not planning on going there at all. I didn't even know what it was. And it ended up being this like very strange, almost cultish like center where I don't know if you're familiar with like Vipassana, where you sit in silence for a week and you don't talk to anybody, you don't even move. This was the opposite, where you wake up at 6 a.m. and you start screaming at the top of your lungs, like in a room full of 20 people.
Oh my gosh.
And so, something like a story I would write would be describing like, holy crap, like I'm in this room and I'm screaming with everybody. I'm really confused. I don't know what's happening. But then something happens that even though, I was confused, even though I didn't choose to be there, I learned some sort of profound lesson about, being happier or living a better life. And one of the things that I took, for example, from that meditation retreat was how we all love to, we have this, we idealize freedom, the idea of freedom. And, but at the end of the day, if it's presented to us, we kind of just sit there quietly and just continue doing whatever it is that we need to do. And we repress those feelings as opposed to being like, screw it. I'm going to go for it. And a lot of people don't do that. And that was like something that I learned from that week. So a story that I would tell would be like, okay, funny, weird situation that has happened to me in my travels. People screaming, everyone's going crazy. I'm confused. I feel really uncomfortable. But then something happens, or I have a conversation with someone that makes me realize that even though I was there and it's weird, which has happened many times, I was there for a reason and I had to learn something, and here is what I learned. And hopefully you can learn from this as well.
It sounds almost like what you're talking about is breaking down barriers too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You write also about the lessons that you've learned, and listeners, just so that you know, later on in this conversation, we'll ask Celine her lessons, her tips for travelers if you want to do this journey that she has done, or if you are an infrequent traveler and just want to travel once a year or once every other year. So we'll get her thoughts on that. But Celine, one of the stories here you wrote are about 3 lessons that you've learned. And interestingly, you write, quote, "Being a solo traveler has made me a better negotiator, a sharper and quicker thinker, and more diplomatic than I could have ever learned in my 9-to-5 job." So let's kind of break that up and take each of those. A better negotiator. I imagine if you're living on $31.48 a day, you have to get pretty good at negotiating pretty quick.
Oh, yeah. It's funny you read that quote to me. I was like, wait, was that me? Oh, well, great. Wonderful. Better negotiator. Oh, absolutely. And I actually wrote an article on Forbes specifically about what I've learned about negotiation. The first thing is, I think I realized that there's a human component to it that a lot of people don't consider. When you think about negotiations, it's like, oh, okay, I want this shirt. It's $50. Give it to me for $30. That's what I'm willing to pay for it. How close can I get to 30 as possible? Yes and no, because there's a lot of elements that come through that people might not think about. And one of the things I realized when I was traveling, especially in developing countries, is, first of all, for sure, they're going to try to rip you off seeing that you're a foreigner. They're definitely going to take a $1, souvenir and try to make you pay $10 for it. That's not okay. So you do have to negotiate in the sense of being like, okay, this is clearly worth $1. Let me give you like 3 or 4, or whatever it is. But it's also about creating a relationship with a person, because nobody wins. Like, you don't win and the other person win when someone walks away feeling ripped off. So it is about striking a balance of like, okay, what can I do for you and what can you do for me, so that we both walk away from this deal and we both feel like we gain something. So when it comes specifically, I don't know if you're buying, like if I was purchasing food or a souvenir or whatever it may be, it's like, okay, this person says $10 and I say 2, just, to get them kind of like to anchor it down a little bit. But then at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit there and fight with them over $1 because they need that dollar or those $2 way more than me. But on the other hand, I don't want to feel like I'm getting ripped off. Like,
Right.
This thing is clearly not $10. I don't want to pay $10 for it. But I also, if it's worth $1, I'm more than willing to pay $3 or $4, because then I got a deal and that person is also getting way more than that thing was worth. And another way I've also realized, and this has helped me immensely in subsidizing my travels, is that bartering is also a way of negotiation. So, for example, money is not the only currency that exists. There is social currency as well. And that is literally what I've traveled the world on is social currency. And for example, if I had a set of services, I have a strategist background, I have, a pretty good following on social media, and I create content. I'm a writer. I have all these skill sets that maybe, for example, a tour business needs. Maybe they need some sort of promotion or some sort of help with their social media. You just offer it. Hey, give me this tour for free. I'll help you out. Like, it's about the same, give or take, about the same value. So why don't we just do this thing for each other? I get a tour, you get some help, and it's no sweat both of our backs. So negotiation it's not just like, give me A and I want B and let's settle on C. It's more like, what is the dynamic here and how can we help each other? And is there a potential for a relationship in the future so we can continue helping each other?
And that's so true. I mean, that's what I found in my travels as well. In the United States, we don't really negotiate or barter very much for services and everyday things. But in many places in the world, it's just simply common. It's the way that business is done.
Yeah, and I think it's much more human, because I think I have obviously my opinions about how the U.S. handles that, but when you make something a transaction, that's all it can ever be. When you make something a social exchange, there is just so much potential there for future benefits, for present benefits, for helping one another, for being introduced to somebody who could help you. But when something's a transaction, that's all it will ever be. Like, you give me this money and I give you this thing, and that's it. Bye. Goodbye. And I don't like approaching any sort of trade that way.
You also write that it has made you a sharper and quicker thinker. And this may be counterintuitive, right? Because if we assume, okay, if we're working in a high-paced job in New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, decisions are coming all the time. We have to be really sharp and on the ball. Whereas if you are traveling at your own pace in your own journey, that you can be more relaxed. But you say that your solo travels have made you a sharper and quicker thinker.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would actually disagree with that initial statement about with corporate. For me personally, working at a corporate job, it made me complacent with my decision making. It was more like, okay, you got to run it through this funnel. It's very bureaucratic most of the time. And it's just like your decision, even unless you're very, very senior and you're the CEO or, the very top exec. But, for most of us, you make a decision and yeah, you have some responsibility for it. And if you make a terrible decision, you get fired. For most of the time, you don't really have tons of consequences for the decisions you make, and a lot of it is just guesswork. And then maybe the company loses money, maybe it gains some money. So it's very wishy-washy, and I felt that I almost got passive with my decision making, because at the end of the day, the things I did wouldn't terribly, it was just a matter of like, am I going to succeed in my job or not? But other than that, it didn't terribly affect me. But with traveling, every decision you make is going to make or break you. And I found that, I'm specifically thinking of a moment when I was in Myanmar. I didn't have a cell phone. And, I took this 10-hour bus to this very remote place called nearby Inle Lake. And it was 5 a.m. I just get dropped off in the middle of a village. And I don't know where I am. I literally don't know where I am. I'm in the middle of a village. It's 5 a.m. There's nobody around, and I don't know what to do. Okay, well, I got to do something, right? So I can't. What am I going to do? Just sit there and just be sad about not doing what I need to do? No, like I have to make a decision, and I need to make it right away. So I need to go find somewhere that's open. I need to get access to a phone number, call the closest place. It's a process, and that process is going to guarantee whether I get safely to my accommodation, so, right. and how long, and if I decide to waste 6 hours doing this, that's half of my day that's gone, as opposed to like, let me do this quickly and efficiently. So there's been many times during my travel where I'm like, okay, I don't know where I am, or I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. I'm not quite sure what this is, but I need to make a decision. I need to either figure out my situation, or I need to ask somebody for help. Something needs to happen. It needs to happen right away, because here's all the list of the consequences if I don't. So it has made me very quick in my thinking and much more decisive, as opposed to like, in New York and a corporate job. And I'm just like, oh, okay, well, this presentation's due. There's a deadline tomorrow. Okay, let me email this person. And I can't really do much until someone gets back to me about this. And, I find it to be a little bit more wishy-washy.
And you have become more diplomatic. So will you be running for Secretary of State one day or something? How have you become more diplomatic?
Yeah, definitely not running for any type of politics. Although watch me be quoted on this like 20 years from now.
We will save the tape, listeners.
Diplomatic in the same sense as when I was speaking about negotiations, that you can't just, especially as a foreigner, when you're in a different country, you're in their territory. And I had moments in the past where I'm even thinking when visiting a Muslim country, and I had moments when I was younger, and I was like, why the heck do I need to put a scarf to like go in this mosque? Like, why do I have to do that? I'm not Muslim. Or even when I visit Catholic churches, where my father would always do like the thing with the water, that you put like, make like a cross. Mm-hmm. And I'd be like, well, I'm not doing that. That's dumb, but I realized that that's not the point. Like when you're entering, the whole point of travel is that you're exposing yourself and to new cultures, and you're willing to be more open-minded. Otherwise, why are you traveling? Like just go to a resort and check out. But when I'm entering a mosque, when I'm entering, a church or whatever it may be, I personally might not believe or subscribe to like what it is that I'm doing, what it is that they're doing, but that doesn't mean I can't respect it. That doesn't mean I can't try to integrate myself into that environment as much as I can. Because when you do that, when you take that step towards either like a person or a culture, people of that culture, they perceive that and they let you in. And I think that one of the reasons why I've been able to, walk in, I'm thinking again, another time in Myanmar where it started raining and these villagers like invited me into their home, and then they just had me stay there for like an hour, just, feeding me and bringing me tea, is because I just sat there. And even though there was a huge language barrier, I did everything they did. Like I sat on the floor, like I would emulate the things they did. I would ask them about them and not tell them about me. So, to be diplomatic I believe is just really a sense of being intuitive to what's happening around you and just adapt, even if it's like not your thing, even if it's not what you believe in, because it's not a matter of, you conceding to them or being like, oh, okay, I believe in whatever it is that you are now. It's more like I'm open. Can you let me in? And most times when people perceive that you are willing to lean in, they will let you in.
It's a cultural sensitivity.
Yes.
Listeners, you can follow some of the photos that Celine posts on Instagram at the Nomad Oasis, the Nomads Oasis with an S, on Twitter, the Nomads Oasis, and Facebook, the Nomads Oasis. You write that travel opens a path to self-discovery and transformation. So I won't ask you why you've been transformed, but how exactly have you been transformed?
That's a very deep philosophical question.
We get paid by the question here at the Voyage Report. I'm kidding.
How have I been transformed? Well, I am certainly not the same. And every time I go to a country or I visit a place, I come back and I'm not the same because something fundamentally changes. I would say the biggest benefits that I've gotten from travel is what I was speaking about before, which is that sense of learning to deal with my fears and of not allowing my fears to get in the way of what it is that I want to do. And I found that actually that is the path to personal freedom. And I think the fundamental transformation that I've had is having a better understanding of what freedom is. Because I used to think that, and of course it's a very large word and there's a billion definitions for it, but to me, I used to think that freedom was the ability, of being like, oh, I'm quitting my corporate job and I'm traveling the world and I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. And yes and no, because even as I was traveling, I still felt like a slave. And I asked myself, if I have what I believe is freedom, then why do I feel like I'm a slave? And I came to the realization, I think this was the most transformative one of all, is that freedom it's not about, like, wherever you go, there's a quote that says, wherever you go, there you are. And if I still hold on to the values that I had when I was in New York, which is like, okay, what's next? What's happening next? What do I need to do? Like, let me book my schedule for the next 3 weeks. I need to have everything planned out or I'm going to fail and blah, blah, blah. And I was still doing that in the beginning of my travels. And I realized that freedom is looking at uncertainty and being okay with it. And that's when I began to feel like I could travel freely and I could look at my fears and be comfortable with them and have all these experiences that I ended up having and allowing serendipity to enter my life. But it was because I redefined what freedom means to me, which isn't just like doing whatever the hell you want in whatever country and not having a corporate job, because you could be just as free, in any type of situation if you just look at the abyss of unknown ahead of you, whether it be like what country you're going to next or, what if you're buying a house or not, if you're having a kid or whatever your personal, situation may be. And you look at that and you're like, you know what? I have no freaking clue what's happening. None of us do. But it's okay. It's okay because I'm just going to live in this moment and I'm going to make the best of what I can do. And I'm going to take action for the now. So I think that is one of the things that really profoundly lodged itself into my heart.
So many parts of my life have been planned down to the minute. In broadcast news, as a broadcast journalist for 20 years, the newscast is going on at 6 p.m., whether you're there or not. So everything is sort of down to the second. And I just decided a couple of years ago that that's not going to be the way that I travel. And so when I travel, just like you, I totally agree. You sort of want the winds to blow you where they will. And when I get to a place, I try not to plan in advance where I'm going to go. Oh, this is an interesting street here. Or, maybe I want to wander to the Eiffel Tower, but I'm going to swing by here because it looks interesting. It looks fascinating. It looks like somewhere that I should explore. And I just find that's a real rewarding part of travel is when you sort of let the journey unfold without too much planning.
Right. I completely agree with that.
By the way, congratulations on being a Forbes contributor. I think this was your first article, and one of the subtitles in the article is "Dreaming is easy, the hard part is jumping." So what finally pushed you over the edge? I mean, if you have dreamed for a long time and you admit the hard part is actually taking that leap and for you putting everything in storage and going off into the world, what was the actual moment where you decided to jump?
I can actually pinpoint it to one moment which I'm actually writing. I will be writing about in my book. But there is one defining moment where everything just cracked. And so, of course, for a decision like that, first of all, disclaimer is obviously was a big. It was a line of dominoes of things happening in my life that eventually led to this. It wasn't, like one specific thing, but there was a moment that kind of helped me tie it all together. So I had just gotten back from. This was about September of 2015. So it was about 9 months before I actually, left, because I left that following July. And I had just gotten back from a volunteer trip. And this man who is an author who traveled the world on human kindness himself, somehow he had found my blog, which was really tiny at the time. And he found my writing and we connected. And he just happened to be launching this project called a Human Connection Project. And he was planning to send somebody, like a millennial, out into a country of their choice to volunteer in a way that they chose. And, everything all paid. So we just happened to be connected because of my writing. And I ended up going on this trip to Cambodia. And, of course, I was there for a few weeks and volunteered. And Cambodia is one of the most corrupt, poorest countries in the world. It's really, really bad over there. And I remember this was a Saturday night, and I decided in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, the capital, and I decided to go out. I was walking around the main street, and Cambodia is well known for having a lot of child prostitution and just child poverty, because they don't really have a lot of social welfare to help kids out. And there's a really long and complicated history behind that I won't go into. Anyway, so the sidewalks were lined with cardboard, and on the cardboard were just tons of kids. And I remember seeing specifically a moment that struck me and brought me to tears was seeing this little toddler on a diaper, kind of sitting on a cardboard box, like looking curiously out into the street, as his mom, what looked to be his mom, was, passed out next to the baby. And, I thought to myself, like, I can't believe that I'm seeing a toddler or, a little baby on a cardboard box in the middle of, the capital city, and nobody's doing anything about it. And I really, really had a breakdown. But that is not the moment. The moment was the next day. I headed back to New York City. And it's a 24-hour journey. So I get back to New York Sunday. So it's about 48 hours at this point because of the time change. And then Monday, I go into work. And my first meeting of the day is we're reviewing a social, it's like a social deck. We create these presentations for our clients about how they should organize their social media. So like, it's called a social playbook. So like what type of colors you should use, like what type of pictures you should use and things like that. It's kind of like an instruction manual for how to do social media. And I'm sitting in this meeting and we're looking at a slide. And on the slide is a picture of a waffle on a ceramic plate. And our target audience for this client is a bit lower income. And the product manager and the account planner are sitting there being like, oh, I don't know if we should have this, waffle on a china plate. I feel like maybe it should be a paper plate, but maybe the paper plate will be offensive because it's a low income target. The page, the slide we're looking at, it's one page out of 50. And that entire presentation, the client will pay $50,000 for, and I guarantee you never even look at. But here we are, wasting our breath, talking about one specific slide about a plate. And I just sat there, and in that moment, it came crashing down to me that I could not waste another minute of my life doing something like this when I had just come back from seeing a child sleeping on a cardboard box, and now this, like, it just felt so meaningless. And so vacuous that at that point I kind of got up. I left the meeting and I sat down and I wrote an email telling all my friends that I had quit my job to
Wow.
go travel the world. And I didn't send it. I just wrote it, and I sat down, and it came out of me. And the second I wrote that email, I finished typing the email. I was like, oh God, now I have to do this. Now I'm responsible.
Wow. And so for our listeners here who are hearing this and they are thinking about jumping, they are thinking perhaps about taking a few months off and taking a journey like yours, I want to get your tips for them, and then after that, we'll get your tips for the more infrequent traveler. But for those who are inspired by your journey and are considering doing their own, what are your top tips for them?
Well, this is counterintuitive because I talk about how I don't plan when I travel, but planning is definitely necessary if you're going to take a jump like this. So, for example, I planned out to make sure I saved enough money over the course of 6 months that could sustain me for 6 months of travel. And obviously, it ended up working out for me, and I'm still doing this. But definitely have like something to fall back on, like an emergency fund. Two, I would say identify the things that you're most passionate about and do something around that. So for me, I'm quite good at travel. I've always been very efficient and cost savvy when it comes to traveling. I've always been good at meeting people on the road, and I've been hosted before by friends of friends, so I had a little bit of experience with that. And of course, I love to write, so I designed a project that worked around my strengths. So it's not you can't just replicate things. Like maybe somebody who's really introverted might not be able to just stay with people around the world through friends of friends, because that requires a lot of talking to people, so you have to take a step back and be like, okay, what are the things I'm best at and passionate about, and how can I combine those into an interesting project, or something that will give me purpose as I travel. So that is something that kept me going, especially when I had terrible days and I wanted to give up. I was like, well, I'm doing something bigger. So it really pushed me through the bad. And I would say, to really examine your fears and find ways to work with them rather than run away from them. So whenever you have something pop up, the biggest one being, I can't afford this, instead of being like, oh crap, I can't afford this. Well, there goes that dream. Be like, okay, so how can I make this work so that I can do this? Like, how can I travel with X budget? Because for me, I would never, ever have been able to do what I did if I didn't have people hosting me along the way. So that was kind of like you have to reverse engineer and find creative solutions to get you what you want. So I would say look at what you want, plan out your project, look at your strengths, come up with something that really marries those strengths. And then instead of being like, oh, that looks too hard, being like, okay, how can I make this work then? And just keep working backwards until you find a solution that you can actually act on.
And what about for the infrequent traveler, perhaps somebody who may never have left the United States to see the world or their home country? What tips would you give them for how to make a successful journey, even if it's just for a few days to one country?
Well, I would actually give them the same tip that I gave myself when I began traveling, because I haven't always solo traveled, is we live in a very interconnected world these days, and I'm sure that everyone knows somebody, or most people know somebody who knows somebody who lives abroad. And I would really highly recommend doing something similar. Obviously I did it on steroids, but if maybe you have a friend or a family member who knows somebody in Italy, reach out to that person in Italy and, ask them like, hey, is it okay, to stay with you or to even meet with you while you're there? Maybe you can get a hotel nearby and meet with that person. Because I found that when you have like at least one human being that in the place that you're visiting, even if you don't see them or you only meet them for coffee once, the very knowledge of knowing that there is somebody there should something happen, should you like run into trouble, like the very knowledge of knowing that there is even like one link actually makes you so much more comfortable with your exploring. So I would really recommend to, for a first-time traveler, someone infrequent traveler, to pick a place where you know somebody, and if you don't know somebody, look for ways. I mean, everyone, again, we live in such an interconnected world, and go there. And even if you meet that person for coffee and pick their brain about what there is to do, it gives you that comfort. And I would also say to challenge yourself to not do the things that everyone else tells you to do. So, for example, with Paris, I hated Paris the first time I visited it because all I did was go to the Eiffel Tower, go to the Notre Dame, go to Sacré-Cœur, and it was just like a never-ending laundry list of things I needed to do because I was in Paris. But when I returned, and I ended up doing the things I wanted to do. So I like museums, so I went to the Louvre, but I don't want to wait in a 2-hour line for the Eiffel Tower. So I didn't go just because everyone says you got to go. And I just spent a lot of time wandering around neighborhoods and sitting in coffee shops and people watching. And wow, that really transformed my view of the city. So I would also say, don't just Google top 10 things to do and do them. Do the things you want to do, fine. But take time to just get lost and just wander and know, if you have a connection in that city, then you know that nothing terrible can happen. You'll have, and if it does, you'll have somebody to call.
Celine DaCosta's website is thenomadsoasis.com, on Instagram at thenomadsoasis, the same handle on Twitter and on Facebook, and she's now a Forbes contributor. Celine, thank you so much for sharing your love affair with the world with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Listeners, what did you think about her journey? Would you attempt something like that? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and our original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.